All right, everybody, welcome to our business panel discussion for Montana Contractors. My name is Meg Ross. I'm a business development executive for First Call Computer Solutions. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a full resource technology company. We specialize in IT managed services, advanced security services, voice over IP, network design and implementation, and we also help small businesses with websites. I'd like to kick this discussion off by introducing David Smith. David is Montana Contractors Association Executive Director. He joined the staff of the association in 2018, and prior to taking the helm of the MCA, he served as a Chief Executive Officer of the Helena Family YMCA for almost a decade. He was leading several high-profile capital campaigns for facilities improvements and instituting new innovative programming to improve membership. David also spent 14 years as the President Chief Executive Officer at the Bozeman Chamber of Commerce. So he definitely has his finger on the pulse of Montana contractors. David, can you give us a quick state of the industry introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Meg, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. Just to start off, I guess a little background on construction and its impact in Montana. Non-residential construction is about $1.5 billion worth of construction across the state. Total construction is almost $3 billion, which is about 6% of the state's gross domestic product. So it's a significant portion of what happens in our state, and it certainly drives a lot of economic factors. As we've entered the coronavirus challenges, nationally, there's almost 1 million people in the construction industry who've lost their jobs. Now, unfortunately, that's obviously not a good number. It's comparative probably to some of the other ones. Our observation is that probably a lot of that has happened in the highly dense areas, Chicago now, New York, some of the East Coast areas. And I think more than anything else, so it's probably occurred a lot in the residential construction area. There's been a lot of residential projects that have been put on hold. A residential house does not take the length of time to build that a building or a highway does, so it's easier to pull the plug, start, stop, get back at it later. So real quick from Montana Department of Transportation, vehicle miles traveled during the month of April, not surprising, is down about 43% across the state. But because of the way the gas tax is collected at the storage facility, not at the pump, the gas tax collections are only projected to be down about 7% by the end of June, which is the state's fiscal year. That's still $18 million, which is not anything to sneeze at. The MDT is projecting for next year would be down about 20%, which would be $50 million. And again, that's nothing to sneeze at. Some of the things that are affecting contractors, 30% of building materials come from China. So I think that'll be a big rebound, or not rebound, but whiplash effect probably in the 6 to 18 months ahead of us. There was a report from the Associated Building, ABC, Associated Building, I forget their
some acronym.
At any rate, the backlog of projects in the building side of construction is now down to 7.8 months, and wow, that's the lowest that's been since 2012. So there's been a nice backlog that's allowed contractors to kind of feather out their projects, and that might be compressed a little bit as we go forward in the coming months. So there's also just some information that just came out. I was on a webinar earlier today from the Bureau of Business and Economic Research about projections of the recovery. We can talk about that some other time too, but we're in this for a couple of years, it looks like.
Wow, okay, great. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you being here, by the way.
Thank you.
So next, before we get started, I'd just like to introduce the other two panelists that we have with us today. One is John Kapus. He's a Missoula native, as well as the president of Western Excavating. John has spent 26 years in the water utility world, where he worked on the board with much of that time spent on disaster preparedness. So he has a lot to say about this subject right now. That includes being sure that an essential service, or as an essential service, that water utilities could provide water service to the community under a pandemic situation. So welcome, John. I really look forward to your input here. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about in terms of your history, especially with this preparedness stuff?
Meg, thank you for having me. I think, yeah, a lot of work went into the past decade from essential services trying to anticipate something like that. And I think that a lot of that foundation is helping make sure the essential services are working, not only in utilities, but also in the contracting world. But I think there's a lot that we've learned when we went into the real world situation on a pandemic that just couldn't be anticipated, and maintaining the flexibility so that, you know, as news comes out every day, as things change every day, to be able to continue to provide service and adjust accordingly. So look forward to this discussion and sharing what we've done as an organization to be able to continue to serve in these interesting times, to say the least.
Well, thank you so much for doing all the hard work that you have, and I really appreciate your time here today. So next, we also have Connor Smith. He is the CEO of First Call Computer Solutions. So Connor, also being my boss, has spent over 26 years in the high-tech industry in Montana. He really focuses on people, because no business can be successful in the long term unless it listens to its customers to understand what they're trying to achieve. And, you know, the truth is that from the technology perspective, that's a really important thing to do. You cannot solve problems if you don't understand where people are going. And I really look forward to your thoughts around some of this as well, Connor. Thanks both of you to be joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be in Montana, and happy to help all businesses work through this. You know, technology is a component, and it really boils down to teamwork as organizations are struggling to figure out, you know, with all these new norms going on, how they can best get the job done and do it effectively, and make for a safer and better workplace. So however we can contribute, here to help.
Great, thank you very much. So as far as my role today, I'm going to be moderating the discussion. I'll be managing the questions. So if anyone has questions throughout the conversation, please don't hesitate to throw those into the chat. I'll be watching them. You'll notice that I'm turning my head every once in a while because I have a separate screen. So don't mind me. I'm watching out for your questions and making sure that those get answered in a timely manner. Okay, so moving on. Just a quick agenda here. At the end of the day, we all want our customers thinking about their workplace, right? Which is going to mean different things to different organizations. There's lots of complexity involved with the COVID pandemic and its economic effect. There's lots of complexity around the key things that we've identified to help, you know, this conversation go through. But at the end of the day, these 5 key things that we've identified are basically what we want to talk about today. So what's changed, what hasn't changed, what's continuing to change within the industry, what are the good things that we can take away from this, and where's the opportunity, right? The 5 key things also break down into work is still work, the norms are changing, and within those norms, there's distance, cleanliness, and teamwork that are all changing. We're also going to touch base a little bit on the phases of this process. And then lastly, we want to touch on just how data, the technology piece plays a role in all of these shifts. Does anyone have anything to add in terms of an agenda?
Nope.
Okay. So we've identified these key contractor functions, right? At the end of the day, I totally recognize that there are other functions that can be associated with contracting, but we all know that there's accounting, estimating, design, job management, procurement, cost control, and record management. They all exist within contractors. So we're thinking about all of those things through this discussion. So let's get to workplace to start with, since we've introduced that first. What's changed, what hasn't, what continues to change, where is the good and where's the opportunity? What is the paradigm shift, if you will? When I spoke to you last week, David, you said you like to ask people what keeps them up at night, right? Can you start with your perspective on workplace and these key questions? I'd like to hear from you, John, after that.
Well, I think it really was keeping contractors and a lot of employers in other industries as well awake at night, wondering how they were going to fill all the jobs that they had on their to-do list. And that's probably why that figure I mentioned earlier was so large of the backlog of projects, is because they just didn't have enough employees to get to it. In January, the Bureau of Business and Economic Research put out a stat that said 63% of high school seniors said they would not take a job in the construction industry, even if it paid $100,000 a year.
Wow.
And people are.
They should try sitting at a desk for 25 years.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're going to get if they don't want that, right? So my takeaway from that was, that's awesome. We just eliminated 63% of the people who might be in the wrong career or vocation. So how do we find the 38% and go after them from a contracting perspective? So now the paradigm shift that's come about today is that maybe there's some contraction going on. Maybe there's somebody who is analyzing a little bit more. Do we need one more employee or one less employee? Do we let the projects, as I've said, feather out a little bit, or do we try to change that? And although this isn't a huge impact on the construction industry, what is the whole work from home phenomenon going to result in? It's probably in the big cities, it's probably going to result in fewer office buildings being built. It may result in cubicle farms coming back and people working in cubicles. But Morning Brew did a survey last week, and they came back and they said 60% of the people who have an opportunity to work from home would love to continue that opportunity. So there's a huge, we're trying to build these big monoliths in towns, and maybe that's not what's going to happen. I mean, again, we're talking Montana here, so that clearly isn't a huge factor, but I mean, an office building, whether it's 60 floors or 2 floors, is still an impact of one way or another.
Sure.
Last thing I want to throw out on this is I saw another thing that this week the Pittsburgh airport is in the middle of just getting ready to start on a big expansion and remodel, and they called a timeout, and they're totally redesigning it based on all the COVID standards and what we think we're going to be needing in the future. So got to be nimble to be in the construction industry, and got to be creative and out in front of some of these things too. So
yeah, I appreciate that. Okay. And
John, you were in the excavating business before COVID. Is it safe to assume you're still in the excavating business?
Still in the excavating business, but it definitely has changed the excavating business. I agree with David how it's going to change the world as far as how it impacts construction, but I'll talk more about the excavation, kind of zeroing in on that. One thing that's the same is that what keeps me up at night is the safety of the employees. I mean, we're constantly putting our employees into false situation. We're always having to look at how do we keep that employee safe. If they're going into a trench box, safety. If they're going up ladders, ladder safety. So this is just a new, how do we keep our employees safe in this situation? So to some degree, I think the construction world is able to handle that better because we think of it every day. So
right.
by keeping that in our culture and reminding employees that this isn't necessarily something new as far as how we have to focus on it every day. It's just a new safety issue we have to deal with. It's helped employees kind of stay within what we're good at, and that is how do we stay safe. But it definitely impacts in how we do the work. Just like before people could just jump into a trench without a trench box, when we started using trench boxes, we had to rethink how our processes work, how we do certain jobs. And so as we look at now, we have to keep our employees separate by 6 feet or wear face mask protect or some sort of barrier. How does that change? How is it going to change when we get into the hot weather? It's kind of nice now, people are fine, but are they going to wear face masks? And you really can't, and it's a challenge we have. You can't maintain 6 feet of separation, right? Constant work and get in trench boxes. So how do we protect our employees under those scenarios? And so that's what we've been working on probably the most is that change. The processes have to change to continue to be the excavation company, continue to do the work we've been doing, but under the new set of safety standards that we're going to have to practice. And I don't think it's just in the short term. I think, these safety practices are going to continue on for quite some time.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I would agree. It's definitely a 9/11 type moment. There are certainly people, potentially on this webinar that don't remember going to the airport before 9/11, and what that used to be like versus what it's like today. So I definitely think it has lasting changes. In terms of the office spaces and buildings and things along those lines, people. There's a lot of people too, if you survey them, that are yearning, to get back to the office and around their peers, and to be in that professional setting. And there's so many different factors, that those immeasurables of what you learn and gain, from being in an office. And I know it's a kind of a buzzword now around remote work, but I definitely think organizations need to be thinking about not so much remote work, but flexible work. And if you really keep that as kind of your guiding light, all of those factors were there anyway before COVID, given the demands on families with 2 working parents, all the different things that we're trying to get done in our lives, mobility. People just need that flexibility. So strongly encourage contractors, and as they're working with the developers and all those types of things, to just keep that flexibility is kind of your main goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
What about,
gentlemen.
I got some just questions on terms of the opportunity. There's challenges with this, but David or John, anything, there's the operational changes that people can make, any opportunities that you're seeing in that? And then in terms of people's business models and the types of services that they offer, and is this opening up any new potential markets, to people, or the way you deliver it? A lot of your stuff requires hands-on in the field stuff, but anything new or innovative that you're hearing out there?
Well, I'll go first. I mean, there's several things that I think are important to know here. First of all, the construction industry as a whole has been one of the slowest industries to embrace technology. And I saw something where of the top 15 companies that are investing in construction technology, the top 14 are not construction companies. So the 15th is Caterpillar. So other people see the opportunity, but the construction industry hasn't quite seen it yet too. But we are seeing some things that are very creative. There's robots that can go into buildings and do surveys at night after the work is done to measure how much has been completed during the day. John probably knows the use of drones anymore is very prevalent. And you go talk to a high school kid and they think construction is gross, but then you show them, a $3,000 drone and it looks pretty
And
cool.
they're excited.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
About
Cloud-based.
things like pre-manufacturing and, getting things more built, off-site and then bringing it on-site.
There's a I want to say it's about a 60-story hotel right in downtown. It's a Marriott product in downtown New York City on Manhattan that's being built entirely in a warehouse in New Jersey. And they're going to bring it in and in 3 weeks assemble it on site. So, I mean, think about the magnitude of that, especially in a state like Montana. If there's opportunities to build in warehouses rather than on a 20 degree below zero day, those are the things that are going to be exciting. Still got to excavate. You can't change the temperature of the ground.
Right. So that's kind of the exciting, sexy stuff. But John, what are your peers talking about, in the real world on the ground?
Well, I think it definitely is pushing acceptance of new technology. And, even our employee group, last year we had moved into electronic time cards, and there was definitely some pushback, and we had the normal, issues with trying to get people to use their phones to put in time cards. Boy, with this pandemic, all of a sudden, employees really liked the fact they didn't have to come into the office. They didn't have to fill out paper time cards. And so there was an instant embracing of that. We also then, like I said, it made us really refocus on our processes. And one of the things we look at is where are we missing technology? At our pitch, we sell to customers. So how are we interacting with the customer? How can we make sure that the customer feels safe, but we're still giving good customer service? And so
Yeah, I love that point, John, of not only can you reinvent a lot of your delivery process and just record keeping process, but you can reinvent the customer experience process, too.
And I think it's necessary to reinvent that customer experience process. And I think it's going to be important for businesses going forward that they really look at that customer and say, okay, we're going to have to deal with customers that think this is nothing to customers that really are scared of what's going on. And so how do we interact to make sure we make all those customers comfortable? And so that's a challenge, but it definitely is providing opportunity for us to really rethink how we're interacting with our customer. And I think, for us, we've taken some steps that we will leave in place because they are definitely improvements that I don't know if we would have gotten to in the next 5 years had things if they don't.
Right. No, what about the demographic changes, in the workforce? As David, you pointed out, it's an older traditional industry, but there's a lot of new blood coming in. Is there opportunity, in terms of their energy, the way that they interact, to build off of that maybe the industry's been a little resistant to?
Yeah, and it sometimes changes thrust upon you, like John said, that, maybe this is exactly what the construction industry needed to be thinking outside the box on this and working with employees. I mean, there's a different, you can't have flexible hours if you're building a road. I mean, the pavement down at certain times, it's got to be done in a certain way. You can't have somebody saying, well, I've hit my 40 hours, I've got to go home. So a lot of social, intellectual changes need to come as well in the future of the workforce.
Yep.
Sure.
And I think along the lines of the HR, what we've seen, one of the challenges with the stimulus that came out is that there was unemployment benefits that made a lot of employees say, hey, I'm better off staying at home. So that really challenged us, especially as we were coming off the layoff season with people who are on unemployment. All of a sudden we need to bring them back and they're looking and saying, hey, I'm better off at home. And so what it allowed us to do is interact with our employees and show the benefits of healthcare and the other aspects that you get by having a good employer. And so for us, we were able to bring people back and we didn't have, we had a little blip of having to deal with that. I think it's going to open up the eyes of some of these employers that don't have benefits and haven't really drawn employees that want to work there, this is opening up their eyes to say, hey, wait a minute, we might have to have more than just the normal pay only, because if you do that, you're going to compete against other industry now stimulus that could leave people at home. So I think that's going to be good for the construction industry to continue to look at what health benefits, what do we provide our employees so that we are very attractive to people wanting to work for us.
Absolutely. Anybody else have anything else to add on workplace?
Not for me.
Okay, I'm going to breeze through a couple of other things here. One of the things beyond the broad question of workplace is ultimately we understand that work is still work, right? But the norms have changed, and those changes are distance, cleanliness, and teamwork. So let's talk through some of those things, and we've actually touched on some of them already through the conversation we just had, right? But from the perspective of distance, specifically, like how are businesses in terms of contractors working to distance the coworkers, the customers, and the vendors versus the employee that goes home from the workplace, comes back after being in their own bubble with their friends and their family? Are they needing to do a lot of testing? Are there new things that are being implemented right now that are going to be standardized going forward? What do you think about that, David? Let's start there.
Well, yeah, the people have to separate the work life from the personal life, and that's not easy all the time. And I mean, I know there's several analogies I've heard where the home life has dictated that, you know, you're not going back to work now because this is too volatile and we don't want you bringing something home. So, you know, there's been some of that. John mentioned the $600 a week that now is an opportunity to collect. So, but I mean, contractors are you know, they're stubborn and they work hard, and so they're going to figure out ways to, you know, deal with the physical distance and the things that have to happen. And they're starting to figure out this Zoom world.
Yeah. And David, when we spoke last week, you also mentioned that there was some kind of technology like that people were wearing to keep them away from one another, or?
Yeah, and in fact, it actually came into play down in the Big Sky Resort Yellowstone Club area, where an employee, they were wearing this. It's a device that you wear. It's near your upper part of your chest, and it detects if you are within 6 feet of another person, and it can also detect if you are asymptomatic or if you have
Wow.
the coronavirus. So I see, you know, there's an area where the technology that is not a construction technology is now being brought into the construction world, just as an example of something.
Sure. So from the cleanliness perspective, John,
Can I just pepper in one thing? I'm curious from John's standpoint on distance. So John, like you said, with the trench boxes, there's certain things that, you know, very difficult to achieve the distance component. And a lot of organizations, you know, that's what they're doing. They're breaking down their core job, their core function, and then applying it, you know, to distancing. So if we go back to those, you know, previous, you know, estimating and procurement and field work and all of those other elements, I assume you've identified the things that it's just very, very difficult to achieve that. Is that 50% of your job, or is that, you know, 10% where it's very difficult to achieve these distancing guidelines with any consistent manner?
No, that's an interesting question, because I think initially everyone thought it was 100% of the job. We can't do this, we can't do that, and it was at first tough for people to think in that concept. But as we started then, you know, kind of breaking it down, and we actually kept our teams separate, and we started separating teams even in the field, so that we didn't have crews necessarily cross-contaminating other crews. So they, you know, we kind of, all right, these 4 people you know, if one of you gets sick, you're all sick type deal. But we didn't just have our whole company shut down. So it's very important that we distance even within our crews, that where in the past we, you know, some of the synergies we get is small crews working and interacting together. So we lost some of that synergy. But I think when we really did focus down on where the tough places are, it's probably 10 to 20% really when we look at it. And then
I'm glad to hear that. And we work with countless industries across the state. And that's basically, you know, I've been asking that same question and fundamentally getting that same answer. You know, that it's typically, you know, somewhere between 10 to 15% where that distancing really becomes a challenge once you break it down. So I'm glad to hear that's true in contracting as well.
I think one of the things that we were struggling with at first is when they first came out with the face covering. You know, they said you couldn't assume that you could then get within 6 feet. So then that was still tough. It's like, well, if you can't get within 6 feet, no matter what you do, you know,
Right.
you almost can't do anything. But once they started relaxing that a bit and said, if you have face covering, some sort of protection, then you can start being within that 6 feet realm. That then opened up where it wasn't as difficult really for any of our functions now. It just puts more of a burden and probably slows things down.
And any out in the field working with other contractors like you guys do all the time, you know, subs and all those types of things. I guess kind of same thing going on in the community. Everybody gets it, you know, and everybody's trying to work together.
I think that is something we focused on right out of the gates was community perception. Because one of my biggest concerns since we were deemed an essential function, we were out there and we were working. But I didn't want the community to look and say, now wait a minute, why do these people get to work and they're being unsafe? So that community perception is really important because there are contractors being turned in all the time. There are complaints because a lot of contractors aren't taking it serious. And so I think that's important that the industry really focuses on that and says, hey, wait a minute, we have to be safe for the good of the community because we're out interacting with other contractors, with the government, with vendors. So it's important for us to do our part to assure that the community's safe. Now, and some of this, though, it's easy to say ideally what should happen, but then to make sure it actually is happening in the field, we find it is, you know, that's the next step because you can have the greatest procedures in the world, but if you can't get buy-in from your employees to make that change and to break the habits, then it's, you know, it's just on paper and it's not being applied. So everything I'm saying, even though I'm saying that's our ideal, I can't say for certain we've instilled that culture yet. And that always takes time in any kind of major safety paradigm shift.
Great. Well, I definitely, again, talking to lots of industries, you know, there is the ideal, there is utopia, and then, but I think organizations and industries seem to be finding a good feasible ideal, and that's covering a number of bases, which is, I think, part why we're seeing the numbers that we are, even within your industry, that's continued to be critical and active. So it's great.
So with all that, we've really kind of touched on cleanliness as well. Is there anything that we want to add to the cleanliness piece in terms of workplace or workspace before we get to teamwork?
Yeah, anything tactically at all, you know, you want to share with other members at all? You know, again, it seems like those details are pretty clear and out there for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think one thing we're seeing is that early on it was tough to get the cleaning supplies to be able to provide to the employees, and the supply chain seemed to catch up a little bit when everything was closed down. Now that it's opening up, it's starting to become difficult to get the kind of hand wipes and disinfectants.
Yep.
But I think the supply chain will be a challenge as more organizations try to open up, and then that's going to go back to the construction industry, trying to make sure their supplies are up to this.
Yeah,
all right.
I would agree.
Well, the teamwork piece is seeming to be, you know, the most difficult. You know, people can understand the distance and the functions, you know, and as John said, it's really just a matter of okay, let's do this, folks. But now you're kind of disrupting all of those connections that people had that were natural and organic in the way that they worked. What struggles, are you seeing there?
Well, I'll address it from the association side of things. I mean, the reason why people belong to an association in part is to network and mix and get to know each other, borrow resources from each other and grow. So, if we can't have events where people can get together and meet and share that, that becomes very challenging. And I mean, we're very social, and this is a tough time to be doing that. I think, especially in Montana, we really like our summers and we like our summer events. And this is going to be a tough summer for all of us in those kind of things. So connecting, whether it's with our teams, our families, our friends, it's going to be very challenging going forward. So, well, I think people will they'll find ways to make it through.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, one more thing, I think from the employer standpoint, though, employers need to be very tuned in to the depression and the social challenges that come with this such a violent upset of your life, and how you have to stay home. Employers are going to be concerned about their employees and what's going on in their home lives. Our kids are being home now until September. There's a lot of ramifications that come back, and they do affect the teamwork.
And that can be a real positive things too. If people have those challenges, it can bring people together. As to how do we flex, and communicate and understand those things so that we can do the best we can to juggle right now. And that can be a good team building exercise in and of itself.
Yeah, so there's lots of different aspects to teamwork, how it's affecting people emotionally, how it's bringing people together, how it's challenging the family atmosphere. So all of those things are really important for the employer to recognize in order to be successful through this pandemic. I would totally agree with both of you here. Let's talk a little bit about phases in terms of what's going on in the next 45 days, 6 months, 12 months, operationally, technically, and emotionally. I'll start with you, David, really quickly. What are the big operational and emotional challenges that you see amongst your members right now that you haven't touched on yet? And you may have touched on all of them, but if there's anything else you'd like to add, this would be a great time.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of these things already, and it's just, if there's a 20% reduction in the gas tax collections next year from July till June of 2021, that affects the projects that are on the books in 2022. So, while the charts go like this and then hopefully they come back up, this part isn't until 2023 or 24 out here. And again, the supply chains, it's not just getting cleansers and sanitizers, it's getting steel and it's getting drywall and equipment, honestly, too. I mean, if factories have been shut down for 2 months and then they've got to reassemble and work on ventilators, now we can come back later and start building equipment. But meanwhile, there's the whole ramifications of not getting the equipment that you need. The employees, we talked about that there's going to be a lot of people that are quite happy to get $600 a week and not work on top of their unemployment.
David, that point on national, state, and local, I know the association has a lobbying, side of it. And yeah, you guys have been critical infrastructure. You've been working through, this entire COVID situation, and the health numbers are pretty good. What impact does that have from a lobbying standpoint? What's going on with the state conversations?
Well, I mean, the fuel tax is a user fund. It's segregated, so it won't be affected by the income tax that probably will be declined over a short period of time. So we'll have to watch that. From a national perspective, we're going to be watching the PPP guidelines. A lot of contractors did apply and get the paycheck guarantees, PPP. So again, we're flying the plane and building it as we go. And so there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of anxiety over some of these big things at the federal level. So AGC of America is a great organization with a very deep team of people that are studying a lot of these things. So stay tuned to the stuff that you see coming across your computer from them.
And are you getting engaged at the state, and local levels, government of, just like you have in the past with safety records and other areas, are you getting engaged around, how is the health and safety, during COVID, of the workforce in the construction industry and contracting industry?
Well, I've been really emphasizing to all the contractors, kind of like what John mentioned, make sure that your hand washing stations are very visible from the street, especially as a county sanitarian drives by. We don't need reasons. Unfortunately, there was a letter to the editor in the Chronicle today, the Bozeman Chronicle, somebody kind of griping about contractors not wearing masks and sitting too close to each other while they're eating lunch. And so we have to realize we're kind of in a glass house, and we have to hold ourselves to higher standards. And it's not easy for a lot of these guys. That's just not their persona. Their persona is put their head down and work hard. But we got to take a step back on that. So again, the market, employees, I think some of these other things we've talked about a little bit, but there'll be some slowdown coming, but I think it'll help. Hopefully it'll just be a correction in Montana.
John, you had touched on, just some of the emotional aspects, within employees and the different, viewpoints, that might exist there. Can you talk through how you've been managing that?
Yeah, and I think early on, people had, they were scared. They didn't know, there was information everywhere about what this meant. And so trying to get the employees kind of on the same page of what, based on everything we know as a corporation, what stance are we going to take? So, and I think that was very important. And I think it's going to be very important for companies moving forward, is to articulate their culture of what this means to them. Because some businesses are going to be just, it's over, let's cruise, everybody's good. Other businesses are going to take a more, careful approach. And I think it's going to be important that you articulate to the employees what you're going to do as a company. And I think keep a constant communication to those employees, because things are going to change on a daily basis. So you can keep your employees on the same page. And I think it's going to be, as the economy starts opening up, I think as we go into this November election and it becomes even more politicized, I think it's going to be a real challenge for corporations and companies to keep their employee group working together through this. And that's probably one of my bigger concerns as we open up and as people have different views, and we're just going to get bombarded on social media and media about what both sides of the political aisle believe on this.
Would it be fair to summarize that from the top down in organizations, communicating who we are and how we behave is super critical right now?
Absolutely.
And I think that's been a strength of the construction industry too. I mean, if the owner's name is on the side of the truck, he cares about how that truck looks. He cares about how those guys look and what the office is like. It's his name on the side there, or her name, and they care. So culture is a very important thing. And John's right. It'll be really critical. And the ones that are going to come out of this in good shape are the ones who have that good culture, and the ones that take good care of their people and are there for them and giving them benefits too.
Well, I'll give you just a technical piece, and then I'll kind of intro into this next slide here. But John, you'd mentioned just simple things like time records, time sheets. There's been resistance, embracing, more of a digital approach to that. And that barrier, has been broken down. And if anything, it's like, this is now better. Are there any other quick examples you can give where you're starting to rethink, from a technical standpoint, and now maybe I don't have this cultural limitation, are there some other things I can introduce?
I think something that was interesting, and it goes back to teamwork, in the construction world, it's the plans out on the hood of the pickup truck. Everyone gathers around, and that's what it was. And now, as we were trying to keep our project managers separated, our supervisors separated, we did have to go do more of a virtual world. And it was interesting, the first meeting we had, everyone's sitting in their trucks pretty much with their phones.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of pushback on that. To be able to get things up on the screen, I think there was a better understanding and a better realization that there is some benefit to that. And so I think we've been able to put that into the culture a little bit and get a little bit more acceptance that has real potential in the future. Now, I say that, but to your point earlier, Connor, where you said people want to interact, we did have to have a lot of meetings out in parking lots with all of us separated, just because people wanted to interact,
Yeah, absolutely. Part of being around other folks on any job, work site or in the office is, excuse the French, but that element of bullshitting.
Yeah.
And so even that we've seen in our organization, move to kind of a fun digital interactive, way too, so that people can express their personalities and get that outlet. And, work is still work, but, it should be enjoyable too. And part of that is, being around other people and joking and having fun and that type of thing as well. So, okay, great.
All right, well, let's move on to the next piece that you were going to talk about here, Connor, which is really acting or reacting from a leadership perspective. Do you want to go around the slide and talk to the group?
Yeah, I want to, speak to this for the contracting industry. There is opportunity in this thing, to change some behaviors and embrace, some new technologies, and not because you have to, but because it's better for your people, it's better for your bottom line, and you begin to choose to. And just using John's example, COVID might have pushed you into digital time records or digital time sheets, but when COVID's over, you're probably not going back. You're going to continue, to do that. So I think leadership has got just a super important job right now, obviously on the operations side and obviously on the emotional side, but also on that technical side of establishing a vision, a plan, and then commitment amongst, your leadership team as to how it is, you're going to carry that through the organization. And that doesn't mean it has to be some big fancy MBA, 20-page, here's our technology plan. It can be simply talked through. This is not new stuff. It's technology that's been out there for a while. That next piece is data and voice flexibility. And as I mentioned before, don't be thinking about just remote work. Work is work, and people need to be able to do their jobs in lots of different places. And that's true for your accounting people and your procurement people and your project managers, field folks, et cetera. Flexibility is where you want to keep your eye on, and both on the data side and on the voice side of things. And so some tools that we've been implementing with lots of contractors is Microsoft 365, which is a stack of tools in the cloud that is very affordable for all organizations. And then the other thing we're finding is contractors are coming to us and saying, okay, this isn't quite working. Things aren't quite lined up between our estimating application and our project management application and accounting. There's hoppy, there's dysfunction there. And so ultimately, when you begin to rely more and more on digital, it's going to put your existing tools under stress. And what you're going to find is we've got some alignment issues. And so, just trying to get those line of business applications that you use aligned will also make the work flow more naturally throughout. And then finally is, just on your voice technologies, we've got the mobile phone, the mobile phones, we've got, desk phones, and ultimately you want to get that stuff to where, people can work the way that they need to work. And a lot of that is turning your personal phone into your business phone as well, and leveraging apps. So we've got a technology called Allworks, which basically makes your mobile phone a desk phone with an app. And then also Microsoft 365, same thing. You can just turn your PC, your Mac, your mobile phone into a desk phone, or where you do need desk phones, on job sites and things along those lines, it will do that and accommodate that too. So flexibility is key. The next one is cybersecurity and backups, and I'll keep this one short. If you make your data flexible, you're going to have to revisit how you're securing that data and how you're backing it up. So you can't make one change without making a change on the other. And then this last one, which I think is probably the most interesting to folks on this call, is workforce development. And so if you go and you get new tools and you implement them, obviously that's going to require behavior change. And so the key thing that I want a couple of key things is, one, make sure the tools that you're investing in are actually going to make your employees' lives better. Because if you can show them that, if you can turn on that light, if you can give them that aha moment, the resistance goes away. We want to make sure that you're not buying technology that nobody's going to use, and then you've made the investment, and now you have confusion, frustration, amongst your workforce. So the key there is make sure that you're getting technology aligned, with how people actually work. Giving them the coaching through it so the light comes on, and you got to do it in small chunks. You can't just revolutionize everything overnight. Do it in a way that people can bite off one chunk at a time, feel good about it, and then they'll move it forward. So my main message to folks in the contracting and all industries is, make sure to seize the opportunity, act as leaders. I really think it's going to be good for Montana and good for this industry, to embrace and lead through this, not only functionally and operationally, but also technically.
Great. Thanks, Connor. Gentlemen, thank you all for your input. I'm just going to do a really quick recap so that there's time for a few questions. We did get a few questions here. So ultimately, we basically talked about the fact that work is still work, right? But there are normals that have changed, and we talked about the distance, the cleanliness, and the teamwork around those. We do need to embrace that challenge and change operationally, technically, and emotionally. And I think that everyone on this panel today has done a good job of talking through that and how it's currently being done and where they're seeing that vision going forward. And the bottom line, we have to stay connected with our people, whether that's vendors or employees, within the industry itself and the marketplace itself. So all that being said, again, I'm really grateful for you guys' time. I do have a couple of questions I want to get to, and then we can close this up. We just have a few more minutes. So one of the questions that I got here is specific to you, John. It's from a contractor that says, it's been my experience over the past 2 months that the cities have been really backed up when it comes to building permits and the processes. Have you been experiencing that?
Our understanding from developers and customers we have is that it has slowed down at the city and at the state level. Okay. It's tough from my perspective of how much of it is slowed down from the government view and how much is maybe some customers tapping the brake a little bit and not wanting their projects to go. So all I can do is say, from our end, new work coming out, we've heard is slowing down. And we've heard it could be government related, but it also could be just people wanting to kind of see how this all rolls out.
Gotcha.
One thing I would add is kind of like what John mentioned with his electronic time clocks is, it's generally been the rule has been that you need what's called a wet signature on
Right.
approvals and notaries and things like that. And so I think there's been some exemptions to that and some allowable, because if a city inspector can't come out or can't be on site, or the bank can't, you're going to sign loan documents in the parking lot, then there needs to be some change, and maybe that's one thing that's changing there too. But cities definitely, this caught them flat-footed in their procedures as well.
Yeah, I totally agree.
From our perspective, because we work with that local government and those types of things, they are behind the curve in terms of technology, and there will be good things that come out of this as well in terms of them changing their operations and streamlining and digitizing things that will help all citizens and all industry. So I think that there is some silver lining on that.
So the next question I have is for David, and we only have a few minutes left, David, and I know that you touched on this just a little bit, so just maybe clarify for this audience member. So what's the difference in your opinion right now for the home building sector versus the more commercial building or utility sector? How are they being affected differently? And I think you did mention earlier,
Sure.
This question came in at the beginning, so just touch on that real quick.
Right. Well, the Montana Building Industry Association is co-located in our office with us, and they are the overarching association for the local home building associations. And in our conversations, you said their people are having a really tough time. They're much smaller operations. So if they've got 4 guys on a crew and one of them can't come in, they're down 25% immediately on their workforce. So it's a longer, it's a broader impact on the residential. And if the supply chain again is disrupted and framing materials and things are going towards larger projects or hospitals or institutional things, that's an effect too. But that's what I'm hearing is that the residential is being impacted more right now immediately by this than the heavy civil and the commercial building side of things. That doesn't mean that that's not going to change next year, which I think there's a good chance of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And based on the conversation today, it sounds like this is going to be a while. All right, so that's all the questions that I have right now. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Let me just get on to my last slide here. Just to be considerate of everybody's time, we've got 1 minute left. Connor has been speaking today quite a bit. He is the CEO of First Call Computer Solution. We do have a couple of different links here, both from the Montana Contractors Association as a resource page, but also a couple of boost packs and some information around COVID-19 and performance guidelines from First Call as well. So please reach out to us if you have additional questions. Again, I just want to thank John and David and Connor for being with me today.
Yeah, John, would you mind just giving a closing comment? Any things you'd like to say, the industry or potentially government stuff that might be watching this later?
I think, as been pointed out, I think there's been a lot of challenges with this situation, but I do think the opportunities that are out there for organizations that really embrace the looking at the processes, looking at their technology, looking at their people, this can be an opportunity to get out on the other side with some real improvements of how you operate, how you treat your employees, and how you interact with your customers. So I think if we keep that positive approach, I think it'll be good for the whole community.
David, what about you?
Same thing. I think that, yeah, it does sometimes, crisis can force you to think differently and focus on the opportunities that are out there and available. that's where we're going to be.
Well, from my standpoint, again, it's wonderful to be in Montana with all of the different professional industry groups that we have, and all the professionals, that are out there doing the work as well. There's wonderful positive things coming out of all of our behavior, through this, and there is good opportunity to change. There's always these big words, remote work, collaboration, all of that kind of stuff. The 2E guides that we've got posted, there will kind of bring that back down into tactically, what you can do. So the first one is, if you're not familiar with Microsoft Teams, it's a great solution, really built around helping organizations work together in different ways and achieve better outcomes than ever. The next one is that COVID Crisis Leadership Performance Guide. We've seen so many recovery guides out there. We decided to put together a performance guide because, I don't want to just recover. I don't want to just normalize. I want to be better than ever. And that's really what our mission is and what we're trying to help people do. So again, thank you very much for your time and your contributions today.
Thanks for putting this on.
Thanks, gentlemen. Have a great day. Happy weekend too.
Thank you.
Thanks.